State Representatives Haraz Ghanbari and Thomas Hall, welcome to Message from the House.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
First time on the podcast, I want to start by asking a little bit about yourselves and your district, just so folks kind of know who you are and where you serve.
Well, I came to the Ohio House in 2019. My wife, Kim, is a public school teacher. We've got 2 young kids at home that are growing like weeds and being adventurous in all the things from sports to their academics to orchestra and dance and all the things that kind of, are challenging them in their own ways, which I think is great to watch those kids kind of grow up. I've also been in the military coming up on close to 25 years now. Was recently promoted to a rank of commander, which is a senior naval officer. I really credit the investment that my mentors, my family, my friends, and my fellow service personnel that I've served with since first enlisting back in 1999 in the Army for their investments in me and for mentoring me. In addition to that, I represent Ohio's 75th House District, which is in Northwest Ohio. That district, as of now, encompasses nearly all of Wood County. The thing that I tell many folks is that every decision that Thomas and I and our colleagues make doesn't just impact our district, it impacts all 88 counties and all the folks that call Ohio home and businesses and people that come and visit our state. And so it's been a real honor and privilege to serve as a state representative. Prior to that, I was in the White House press corps as the youngest AP staff photographer, had a front row seat to history covering 2 presidents, George W. Bush and Barack Obama, 2 secretaries of defense, a secretary of state. After I left the AP and moved back to Ohio, I worked in higher education for a little while, helping service members transition from military service to the classroom and beyond, and finding holistic ways in which we can support the family dynamic and the challenges that many of our servicemen and women face when they take the uniform off, or those that are in the National Guard and Reserve component that, are going to college full time, but then maybe they take a semester or 2 off because our nation needs them to forward deploy to Iraq or Afghanistan or somewhere else around the globe. When they come back, especially being not near any big active duty installations, but how do we as the state of Ohio with our local services support them and their families? And so trying to take that mindset here to service in the State House and having the opportunity to serve with guys like Thomas, make it all worth it.
Rep Hall?
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I come from Southwest Ohio, born and raised in Middletown. Went to public high school there at Madison High School, furthered my education at Miami University, love and honor, and put myself back through the Fire Academy. Got to get my Firefighter Level 2 through Butler Tech, and then recently in the last 6 months was able to go back and get my EMT and pass registry. So now I'm transitioning more to working on the medic. So it's been a huge, blessing for me to, I think, do both jobs. I truly feel like I have the best life because I get to do 2 really fun jobs. But at the core of it is serving people and being there for people, whether they're reaching out to our state office for help with resources up here or bill ideas, or responding to a 911 call and seeing someone on their worst day. This job has been the honor of a lifetime. It's crazy to think that we're already looking at our 4th term, and in the Ohio House, obviously you get termed out after 4 terms, 4 consecutive terms. So looking at legislation, which I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit today, but that's a little bit of who I am. My fiance and I, we both still live in Madison Township. She's from Madison Township as well. And it's a great district. I really enjoy the locals. I really enjoy our county officials and the collaboration.
You both talked about your service and law enforcement and the military. I believe the theme is that has really shaped a lot of your legislative priorities. Kind of talk through why and what you're working on.
Well, for me, I've always looked at the number one priority of a government is to provide for the safety and security of the citizens. So at the local level, the state level, the national level, etc. I understand that over the last several years, many folks that have served as law enforcement officers are constantly second-guessed and split-second decisions. So making sure that our first responders, our police officers, our firefighters, our paramedics, and others have the support services that they need so that when their community calls, they can respond. From a mental health perspective, mental health is a big challenge. I could say this as someone that has lost friends through suicide that were law enforcement officers, or talking with friends in the fire services that have buried their colleagues because their colleagues couldn't beat the demons that they were internalizing. There's a statistic in the fire service that for every firefighter that dies in the line of duty, there's approximately 3 that take their lives. In the military, 22 veterans a day across the nation on average take their lives. And I've been focused on supporting our public safety professionals since well before I came to the State House, and will continue to fight for those men and women well after I leave the State House. And if we have a good, strong foundation of public safety in our community, the economic development pieces, our schools, our parks, and all the other things that make our communities areas where we want to raise our families and invest in our communities, all those things can happen when people feel safe. And they know that when they call 911, and it is quite possibly the toughest day of their life, you are having men and women run toward danger with total disregard for their own safety to go serve others. And so that's what drives my sense of purpose and my admiration for our first responder community.
Yeah, I think that up here I learned very early on that there are hundreds of subject areas. And, the most important thing up here is our time. And whether it's being pulled into committees, session, caucus discussions, or meeting with individual members about legislation, I think it's really important for members to find, kind of their path and what they're passionate about. And very early on, I think Representative Ghanbari would say the same thing, that, we all bonded around the idea of public safety and what we can actually do for public safety. It's one thing to run a campaign. It's one thing to say, oh, I support first responders. Well, what did you do with your time to show that you support first responders? I think that for me, like if I wasn't, like growing up, if I wasn't at home, I was at the Firehouse. If I wasn't, in school, I was at the Firehouse. And then growing up, my dad always took me on ride-alongs. And I know Rep. Ghanbari was big on, ride along and learn, and an initiative for our colleagues from both sides of the aisle to go out and actually see what it's like to be a first responder. I wholeheartedly believe that first responders are a thing that people take for granted every day. That they call 911 and, they're going to show up because they have to. They don't know the back end of like what first responders actually go through, about what they see, about what they actually do. And there's a lot of misconceptions, I think, in that regard. And you look at Southeast Ohio and Appalachia and all of the ways they've made it work all of these years. But now they're turning towards, well, what's the future look like for coverage in these areas? Mm-hmm. And there's a big push. The governor's talked about this. Fire chiefs talked about this. Making sure that we get EMS coverage in these areas. I would argue 80 to 85% of calls for 911 are for EMS over fire. There's a big misconception that there's a lot of firefighting. There's really not, and that's a good thing because as Rep. Ghanbari talked about, the average right now is a fire doubles every 30 seconds. So if a fire starts in this room right now, it could be 2 minutes before the room completely flashes and ignites everything in the room. So I think there's a greater emphasis on making sure that our first responders are trained and also being able to be there in a moment's notice to save lives. Because truly, if we said this 5-10 years ago, truly now seconds do matter. And I think that that's something that gets lost in all these conversations is the seconds that it does take or it doesn't take for a first responder to get there to help you.
Rep Hall, I want to stick with you. Talk about a couple of the bills that you are working on right now or have passed that directly help law enforcement, EMS, fire crews.
Yeah, so first one I'll start with is House Bill 20. The House passed this. It's over in the Senate now. I've worked on it with, I call him Sheriff Plummer, Representative Phil Plummer from the Dayton area. This is very simple in nature. If a first responder responds to an incident or a scene, give them space to work. What we're seeing a lot of times is people want to be helpful, and we're not saying that people are not helpful when they do help first responders, but we also want to acknowledge that first responders have a job to do when they get there, and they are not working in controlled environments. A lot of these environments are uncontrolled, and a lot of the scenes that they're rolling up on are very hectic and very tragic in some aspects. So the bill is quite simple. It's just saying to please give first responders the room to work while they're on the scene of an incident. We give warnings to get back. If you don't get back after a warning or two, you are subject to being arrested. One of the things that came up is a huge misconception. We are not saying that people can't record. We're not saying people can't have their First Amendment right to say things to the first responders. We are just trying to give them the space while they're there to do their job and then move on. The next one is I've actually gotten the most meetings about this General Assembly. It's quite simple in nature as well. Talks about, it's House Bill 139, talks about fire hydrants. And we just had the 5th hearing today in House Local Government Committee. Where this bill stems from is a few years back, I was going to a house fire in our community, pulled up, first truck pulled up right in front of the house. Hydrant was in the front yard of the house across the street. They deploy a hose line, get a crew going to go inside. At that moment, they realized the hydrant across the street was broken. I was on the 3rd truck in. By the time we got there, we hit the hydrant, but that hydrant was 400 or 500 feet down the road. The way we're set up in our department is we carry minimum 1,000 gallons on our apparatus for our engines and tankers. Some departments carry about 500 gallons. So what does that mean in regards to time? I know on our rescue truck that has 300 gallons that we don't typically like to roll as a first out. That gives me about 1 minute and 28 seconds of water before I'm out. So you pull up to a house fire, you should know that the hydrant in your front yard is going to work. What we're seeing is quite the opposite. Hydrants are not getting tested. They're not getting maintained. And everything in the fire service has an expiration date, whether it's your tools, whether it's your turnout gear, which is 10 years until it expires. Everything in the fire service will eventually expire. And if we're not maintaining, if we're not checking these hydrants, we just had a structure fire 2 weeks ago, took 4 or 5 guys to open the hydrant because it was seized, and the threads were seized. So that's another bill, and I'll touch on one more briefly, is House Bill 280, the pension reform bill that we've introduced. This is the 3rd General Assembly now. We've got it past the last General Assembly, have had some IP meetings this General Assembly to hopefully keep that moving. But in short, trying to make sure our first responders' pensions are solvent and making sure that when they go to hang up their gear for the last time, that they are able to retire and have a solid pension.
Thank you, Rep Ghanbari. Anything stick out to you that you want to mention, bills-wise, or?
Yeah, I would say one of the very first pieces of legislation that I worked on back in 2019, 2020 timeframe dealt with allowing our township officers to enforce the laws on the interstate that go through their jurisdiction. And this is something that had been around for a while and continued to have a lot of opposition to. And when I became the state rep, I brought all the stakeholders in for an interested party meeting. And I simply said, folks, I can't answer for what's happened in the past and some of the turf wars and the battles that have happened between different jurisdictions and agencies, etc. But at the end of the day, everyone in this room has taken an oath to protect and serve their communities. And we understand and we have seen firsthand the decline in the number of individuals that want to go into law enforcement. When you talk to police officers that have been on the force for 25, 30, 40 years, firefighters that have been on the force for decades, they will tell you when they came into this profession to take the public service exam, the room was packed. Hundreds and hundreds of people coming to test for 5, 10, 15 positions. Now you're lucky if you've got 2 or 3 qualified people that are actually showing up to take those tests. So my encouragement to them was there is enough for all of us to do, but we will serve our communities better when we work collaboratively. And what I think is important to underscore for the broader public is we as a legislative body at the state, we ultimately, through our deliberate decision-making process, fund a variety of state entities. One of those entities is the Ohio State Highway Patrol. They used to be funded through the gas tax, and then they were taken out of the gas tax, and then they're funded through some other different fees. But those fees oftentimes are staying stagnant, and so pay and operating budget costs and things like that were not getting the attention that they needed. Subsequently, we were seeing a lot of troopers get their minimum years in for retirement and go ahead and retire and maybe move on to another profession or just go into complete total retirement. But in speaking with the governor and directors of public safety and the colonel's office and others, and through this initiative that I launched, as Rep. Hall mentioned a few years back, the Ride Along and Learn initiative, I wanted my colleagues to understand what our state troopers do on a daily basis. It's not simply chasing taillights down the road to write someone a ticket. What our troopers do day in and day out would amaze any citizen that would take the time to engage in those conversations. And you can go from 0 to 150 in a millisecond when dispatch calls and says there's a wrong way driver on the interstate. There's an active shooter incident on the interstate. But the reason it was important to make sure we were properly funding our Ohio State Highway Patrol is because we don't fund our sheriff's offices. And our sheriffs play a key role. They are the chief law enforcement officer, only law enforcement officer in the nation, the county sheriff, which is an elected position. Your chiefs aren't elected, your park rangers aren't elected, your colonel of highway patrol is not elected. So working with the BSSA and other law enforcement partners, if there is an issue in any of our counties in which the sheriff may need an aviation asset or needs to utilize the drug lab or needs to have canine or needs to have the mobile field force or their SWAT team is working in collaboration with the highway patrol special response team, those local communities will never receive a bill from the highway patrol for those services. So supporting our state troopers and supporting the highway patrol operation holistically makes a direct investment into our local law enforcement officials. And then the last thing I would say is, working closely with Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost and some of the retail crime task force legislation that I've spearheaded. We have a lot of retail crime up in Northwest Ohio based on where we are, situated along Interstate 75, the Ohio Turnpike, and other roads that traverse through our state as people are traveling from states south of us up to Michigan, from the East Coast to the West Coast, and seeing some of these individuals that have nefarious ideas on preying on our communities and preying on not only our big box stores, but also our small mom and pop stores, like the one that Rep. Hall mentioned he worked at, when he was younger, a local mom and pop establishment. So the Retail Crime Task Force, we stood it up in Wood County. It is making a significant difference day in and day out. And now we're looking on how we can replicate what we're doing in Wood County to the other 87 counties throughout the state.
I want to ask you both. You both stood up on the House floor to testify in support of House Bill 184, which invests $40 million in PTSD treatment for veterans. Why was this so important for both of you to stand up and testify on?
Let me put it to you like this. If I never have to read another obituary of a first responder who's taken his or her life, or stand up and deliver a eulogy for a friend that has taken his life, my prayers will be answered. The challenges that these men and women go through on a daily basis, what Thomas and I want, and what our colleagues want, and I'll go a step further to say like what our communities want, is we want those men and women to come home to their families at the end of their shift. We want them to be able to grow up and see their kids grow up, to grow old, to sit in that rocking chair, to reflect on life. And those that are battling the demons of post-traumatic stress, which is an invisible injury, right? You can see someone that is injured that, maybe they were injured in military service, they lost a leg, or they have, a Purple Heart designation, or you talk with them, you can understand that. You cannot see the physical injuries of invisible wounds because those are things you internalize, right? And so the first step of that is telling someone, hey, I need help. But the way in which they have the courage to do that is knowing that they're being supported legislatively, that they're being supported by their employers, that they're being supported by their community. Probably most importantly of all that, being supported by their family and their friends. And it's something else to go to these funerals because they're brothers and sisters from other agencies, from other states, from all over the country. They come. And it doesn't matter the patch that Thomas is wearing or the badge that the police officers were wearing. You're a family.
Rep Hall.
Yeah, I think the vote for House Bill 184, specifically for the PTSI funding, was probably one of the most important votes I think I've ever gotten to take on the House floor, because I've seen firsthand the effects of not treated mental health. We've had guys fall through floors of house fires. They get covered, Bureau of Workers' Comp. They're healed in a year, back on the job. I had a really rough start to this year. In 6 days, I had 3 cardiac arrest calls. Those things stick with you. We have a great support staff at our station, a great support staff system, a great group of individuals who, like Representative Ghanbari said, service above self type mindset. And we're mentally prepared. And every situation that we've encountered or faced, go back to the saying of you resort to your lowest level of training. So we do a lot of training to make those situations flow more seamlessly. I think the biggest thing that sticks with me is, and I've still struggled with this because we had a call that you had mentioned about a child drowning. We had a 5-year-old. We got there in 2 minutes. We did everything right. Flew him, did everything right, got him back, and he still passed away, tragically. And I think that's what kind of sticks with me is you can do everything right in the job and still not get a save. And that's the part that we kind of go back and forth on as well. What could we have done this or could we have done that? But I think more specifically with this funding is we now have the ability to help our first responders get additional help rather than communicating with your team or communicating with your crew or your officers. We now have the ability for them to get additional help on top of that. Because what we do in our department is different than the other departments in our area. And I think that although we've got the funding, we've got it kind of set up, we need to actually get the setup of this so people can start applying for this. Depression and mental health are things on the rise in first responders. I forget the actual numbers to this, but there's a study out there that shows that first responders see so many more traumatic events in their lives than a normal person. Well, yeah, they're responding to these incidences, but they don't get to pick and choose which ones they go to. We could be sitting at the station and have one call for the day. We could be sitting at the station and have 3 calls. We don't get to pick what happens. We just get to pick to respond to those, and that's our job, and that's our duty. And everybody, it doesn't matter who you ask, whether it's the 35-year-old veteran or 30-year veteran or the 25-year-old new guy. It's the best job in the world. And they will tell you that it doesn't matter what kind of day they've had, doesn't matter what kind of calls they've had, doesn't matter how much sleep they had. It goes back to, being there for your community, being there for one another. And one thing we rely on a lot in our area is mutual aid. And we're a bigger county. We're 7th largest county, 400,000 people, but we rely a lot on our mutual aid agreements with jurisdictions right next to us. So we try to do a lot more training with one another because what we're going through, they're going through as well. And when we show up on scene, we want to do the best job possible. But on the back end, as elected officials, we need to be making sure we're looking out for our first responders because day in and day out, they do the job, but then it adds up and it adds up. And I think that's what the part where Representative Ghanbari talked about with first responders, seeing more rise in depression and mental illnesses because of it adding up and not getting treated. So I think PTSI funding was a huge step, but we have to finish the job in regards to setting it up to getting it activated and getting people the help they need.
I will throw in that I have to do all of that training, not as extensive being a swim coach and a lifeguard. So we have to go through all the CPR training and first aid training and all of that stuff once a month, so I can understand.
And something we passed last General Assembly was House Bill 303, signed into law that basically made training easier to be recommended to the board. Mm-hmm. So right now, or before that, it was a little bit more difficult to get the updated training. What we're seeing is trends. I mean, there's trends always happening in our world, and we need to be best prepared to address those trends and see those things in the field. So I think that was a big thing that it was bipartisan, got probably over 90 votes. So it's not really the most controversial thing that will get the headlines, but it's something first responders will be able to address better going forward because they'll be able to get the training necessary to meet those needs that they see in the community.
Representatives, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Quickly, our social media. You can follow us on the Ohio House GOP Caucus on Facebook, Ohio House _GOP on Instagram, and OHR GOP Caucus on Twitter. You can subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. State Representative Haraz Ghanbari and Representative Thomas Hall, thanks again.
Thank you.